Hi, I'm Cassie. 3 months ago, my sister Victoria threw her phone at me and screamed that I was poisoning her brand. My parents just sat there nodding like trained seals. I didn't fight back. I didn't even pick up the phone. I just walked out of their Scottsdale mansion with my laptop bag and never looked back. But yesterday, I got a call that changed everything. They were being evicted from their luxury apartment, and when they called to beg their landlord for mercy, they discovered something that made their perfect little world crumble. The voice on the other end wasn't some faceless property manager, it was me. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The air conditioning hummed quietly in the Rivera family's sprawling Scottsdale home, but the atmosphere inside felt suffocating. I sat cross-legged on the marble floor of their designer living room, my laptop balanced on my knees, surrounded by printed spreadsheets and sticky notes that mapped out what I thought was our family's next big venture. The late afternoon sun streamed through their floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the pristine white furniture that nobody was actually allowed to sit on. Victoria perched on the edge of their velvet ottoman, ring light positioned just so, recording what she called authentic family moments for her lifestyle brand. Her followers ate up these glimpses into the Rivera family dynamic, especially when she painted herself as the entrepreneurial daughter helping her quirky little sister with tech stuff. What they didn't see was how she'd spend hours beforehand staging every detail, from the placement of her coffee cup to the way she'd casually toss her highlighted hair. Okay, babe, so today we're diving deep into family business planning. Victoria cooed into her phone camera, her voice taking on that artificial sweetness she reserved for her audience. My little sister Cassie has been working on some super technical stuff for our new venture, and I'm going to show you how we collaborate as a family team. I looked up from my laptop screen, confused. This was the first I'd heard about any collaboration. For the past 6 months, I'd been developing a comprehensive property management software system, complete with tenant communication protocols, maintenance tracking, and automated payment processing. It was my passion project, born from my experience managing rental properties during college and refined through countless late nights of coding and system testing. My parents, Helen and Bob, sat on their cream leather sectional, phones in hand, occasionally glancing up to nod approvingly at whatever Victoria was saying. They'd always been her most devoted audience, ever since she'd started gaining traction as a lifestyle influencer 3 years ago. Her Instagram account, Living Victoriously, had grown to over 200,000 followers who hung on her every word about interior design, family values, and entrepreneurial success. The thing about family businesses, Victoria continued, gesturing broadly with her manicured hands, is that everyone brings their unique strengths to the table. I handle the vision, the branding, the customer relations, basically all the people-facing stuff that requires real emotional intelligence. And Cassie, well, she's great with the boring technical back-end things that I honestly don't have time for. I felt my stomach tighten. The software I'd been building wasn't just technical back-end stuff, it was a complete solution that I'd designed from the ground up, incorporating everything I'd learned about property management, tenant relations, and business operations. I'd spent months researching market gaps, interviewing property managers, and testing user interfaces. This wasn't some random coding project, it was my attempt to solve real problems I'd observed in the industry. Victoria, I said quietly, not wanting to interrupt her recording but needing clarification, what family business are you talking about? I thought I was developing this software for my own company. She paused her recording, her smile faltering for just a moment before snapping back into place. Oh, Cassie, don't be silly. We've all been supporting you with this project, Mom's been giving you feedback, Dad's been helping with business strategy. This has always been a family effort. I blinked trying to process what she was saying. The feedback she mentioned consisted of my mother occasionally asking if I was still playing with computers, and my father suggesting I should focus on getting a real job instead of chasing entrepreneurial dreams. The business strategy help had been exactly zero conversations about market analysis, revenue models, or growth planning. But I've been funding the development myself, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I've been living off savings and freelance work to pay for servers, software licenses, user testing. Money isn't everything, Cassie, Helen interrupted, finally looking up from her phone. Family support is invaluable. Do you know how many people would kill to have the kind of emotional backing you've received from us? I stared at her, wondering if we were living in the same reality. The emotional backing had consisted of frequent reminders that my project was too ambitious for someone like me, and suggestions that I should consider a nice stable job in customer service instead. Victoria resumed her recording, her tone becoming more animated. So anyway, we're launching Rivera Family Solutions next month, and I'm so excited to share this journey with you guys. It's going to be focused on luxury property management with a personal touch, exactly what today's high-end market is missing. My hands froze over my keyboard. Rivera Family Solutions, she was talking about my software, my months of work, my sleepless nights debugging code and perfecting user workflows. But somehow, in her version of events, it had become a family venture with her at the helm. The beautiful thing about working with family, Victoria continued, is that trust and communication come naturally. We can move fast, make decisions quickly, and really prioritize what matters, which is delivering an amazing experience for our future clients. I opened my mouth to object, but Bob cut me off with a dismissive wave of his hand. Let your sister finish, Cassie, she's got the camera rolling. The next 20 minutes felt like watching someone else's life unfold in front of me. Victoria outlined plans for marketing campaigns, client onboarding processes, and revenue projections, all built around the software I'd created. She spoke with the confidence of someone who'd been intimately involved in every aspect of development, casually dropping technical terms she'd obviously Googled moments before. When she finally stopped recording, I cleared my throat. Victoria, can we talk about this privately? I think there might be some confusion. Her voice sharpened, the camera-ready sweetness evaporating instantly. What's confusing about family members working together toward a common goal? I've been building this software as my own project, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I never agreed to make it a family business. I haven't even finished testing all the features yet. Victoria's laugh was cold and sharp. Oh please. You think you can handle running a real business by yourself? You can barely handle basic social interactions, Cassie. You live in your little tech bubble and have no idea how the real world works. I felt the familiar sting of her words, the way she could always find exactly the right spot to press that would make me doubt myself. But this time, something was different. This time, she wasn't just attacking my personality or my social skills. She was trying to take credit for something I'd actually built. I've been working in property management for 4 years, I said, my voice growing stronger. I know exactly how the real world works. I've dealt with difficult tenants, emergency repairs, late-night maintenance calls. Managing a few college rental houses is hardly the same as running a legitimate business. Bob interjected, Victoria has real experience with branding, marketing, customer relationships. Those are the skills that actually matter in business. I looked around the room, taking in their faces. Helen was already back to scrolling through her phone, clearly bored with the conversation. Bob was nodding along with whatever Victoria said, the way he always did. And Victoria herself was staring at me with a mixture of annoyance and condescension, as if I was a child who didn't understand how the adult world worked. The software isn't ready for launch, I said firmly. There are still bugs in the payment processing module, and I haven't finished the automated maintenance scheduling feature. If we try to take this to market now, it'll be a disaster. Victoria's eyes flashed with anger. This is exactly what I'm talking about. You're always finding problems, always making excuses. You're so negative, Cassie, you stress everyone out with your constant worrying and perfectionism. I'm not being negative, I protested. I'm being realistic about software development timelines. These things take time to... You know what? Victoria stood up abruptly, her phone still clutched in her hand. You're sabotaging this project because you can't handle not being in control. You'd rather see the whole thing fail than let someone else take the lead. The accusation hit me like a physical blow. After months of pouring my heart and soul into this project, after countless nights of coding and testing and refining, she was accusing me of sabotage because I didn't want to rush an unfinished product to market. That's not true, I said, but my voice sounded weak even to my own ears. It is true, Victoria shot back. You've always been jealous of my success. You can't stand that I have followers, that people actually want to hear what I have to say. So you try to drag down everyone around you. I felt tears pricking at the corners of my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Not here, not in front of them. I'm not jealous of you, Victoria. I just want to make sure we deliver a quality product that actually works. Quality product. She laughed again, the sound harsh and mocking. Cassie, you've been developing this thing for months and months. How much longer do you need? A year? 2 years? At some point, you have to actually ship something instead of hiding behind endless perfectionism. Helen finally looked up from her phone, sighing dramatically. Honestly, Cassie, your sister has a point. You do tend to overthink things. Maybe it would be good for you to let Victoria handle the business side while you focus on the technical stuff you're good at. The technical stuff I'm good at is the entire software, I said, my frustration finally breaking through. The customer relationship management, the payment processing, the maintenance scheduling, the reporting dashboard, I built all of it. There is no business side separate from the technical side, they're integrated. Victoria's face was getting red now, her carefully applied makeup starting to look blotchy around her cheeks. This is exactly what I mean about your attitude problem. You act like you're the only one who understands anything, like the rest of us are too stupid to contribute. It's insulting, Cassie. I never said you were stupid, I protested. I just said that I built this software myself, which is true. With family support, Bob added firmly. You've been living at home, eating our food, using our internet. That's investment, Cassie. That means we're partners in this venture whether you want to admit it or not. I stared at him, genuinely speechless. I'd been staying in their guest room for 3 months while I worked on the software, but that was because I'd used up my savings funding the development.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
I'd offered multiple times to pay rent or contribute to household expenses, but they'd insisted it wasn't necessary. Now apparently, that generosity came with strings attached. I can pay you back for the room and board, I said quietly. I never intended for that to be an investment in my project. Victoria threw her phone down on the glass coffee table with a sharp crack. God, you're impossible. Everything has to be about you, doesn't it? Your project, your software, your vision. What about family, Cassie? What about supporting each other and working together toward common goals? I do support the family, I said, my voice starting to shake despite my efforts to stay calm. I helped you set up your entire social media workflow. I built the automated posting system you use. I created the analytics dashboard that tracks your engagement metrics. I've never asked for credit or payment for any of that. That's different, Victoria snapped. That was just helping out with small technical favors. This is a real business, with real money involved. I felt something shift inside me, a clarity that cut through the confusion and self-doubt. She was right that this was different. All those times I'd helped her with technical problems, built tools to make her life easier, solved coding challenges for her projects, she'd treated those as throwaway favors that didn't really matter. But now that there was potential money involved, suddenly my work was valuable enough to claim ownership of. If my technical contributions don't matter, I said slowly, then you should be able to launch Rivera Family Solutions without my software. The room went very quiet. Victoria's eyes widened slightly, as if she hadn't expected me to call her bluff. Helen and Bob exchanged glances, their expressions shifting from annoyed to concerned. That's not the point, Victoria said, but some of the confidence had drained from her voice. The point is that this should be a family effort. We should be working together, not fighting over who gets credit. We can work together, I said, my resolve strengthening with every word. But we need to have clear agreements about roles, responsibilities, and ownership. If you want to handle marketing and customer relations, that's great. But the software remains mine until we have a formal partnership agreement that spells out everyone's contributions and equity stakes. Victoria's face went through several expressions in rapid succession: surprise, calculation, and finally anger. Equity stakes. Jesus, Cassie, listen to yourself. You sound like some corporate lawyer instead of a family member. Maybe because you're treating this like a corporate takeover instead of a family collaboration, I replied. Bob stood up abruptly, his face flushed with irritation. That's enough, Cassie, you're being disrespectful to your sister and your family. We've been nothing but supportive of your little computer project, and this is how you repay us. With legal threats and demands. I'm not making threats, I said, but I could feel the situation spiraling out of control. I'm just trying to establish clear boundaries. Victoria's voice rose to a near shout. With your own family, what kind of person talks about boundaries with the people who love them and support them? I looked around the room again, taking in their faces. Bob's jaw was set in a hard line, his arms crossed defensively. Helen was shaking her head with disappointment, as if I'd just announced my intention to rob a bank. And Victoria was staring at me with such intense anger that I actually took a step backward. You know what your problem is, Cassie, Victoria continued, her voice dropping to a deadly quiet. You're so paranoid and controlling that you can't even trust your own family. You'd rather destroy something beautiful than share it with the people who care about you. I'm not trying to destroy anything, I said weakly. I just want to make sure. You're toxic. She cut me off. You bring this negative energy into everything you touch. You make everyone around you miserable with your suspicion and your need to control every detail. Honestly, I don't know why we even try to include you in family projects anymore. The words hit me like a series of physical blows. Toxic, negative energy, making everyone miserable. These weren't criticisms of my business approach or my software development timeline. These were attacks on my fundamental worth as a person. I stood there for a moment, laptop still balanced in my hands, looking at the three people who were supposed to love and support me unconditionally. Instead, I saw strangers who had somehow convinced themselves that my desire to protect my own work was a character flaw that needed to be corrected. Fine, I said quietly, closing my laptop with a soft click. If I'm so toxic and negative, then maybe it's better for everyone if I just remove myself from the situation. I walked toward the hallway, my footsteps echoing against the marble floors. Behind me, I heard Helen sigh loudly. "Don't be so dramatic, Cassie," she called after me. "Your sister didn't mean." "Yes, I did," Victoria interrupted. "I meant every word. Maybe if Cassie actually listened to feedback instead of getting defensive, she could learn something about how to work with other people." I paused at the bottom of the staircase, my hand on the polished banister. Part of me wanted to turn around, to try one more time to explain my position, to find some way to make them understand that protecting my work wasn't the same as attacking my family. But a larger part of me was tired. Tired of being treated like my contributions didn't matter. Tired of being painted as difficult for wanting basic respect and acknowledgement. Tired of walking on eggshells around people who claim to love me while consistently demonstrating that their version of love required me to diminish myself. I climbed the stairs to the guest room where I'd been staying, each step feeling heavier than the last. The room was neat and impersonal, decorated in the same sterile beige and white palette as the rest of the house. My belongings were scattered across the desk and dresser, laptop charger, notebooks filled with software specs, a few changes of clothes, the small succulent plant I'd bought to make the space feel more like home. I pulled my old college backpack from the closet and began packing methodically. Laptop and charger went in first, wrapped carefully in a spare sweater. Then the notebooks, my phone charger, a few essential clothes. I left behind the books I'd brought, the decorative picture frame with a photo of us from last Christmas, the nice sweater Victoria had bought me for my birthday. The packing took less than 15 minutes. Looking around the room, it was hard to tell I'd ever been there at all. Just like Victoria wanted, I thought grimly. I slung the backpack over my shoulder and headed back downstairs. The family was still in the living room, their voices low but audible as I approached. "Always been sensitive," Helen was saying. "She'll cool off and come back in a few hours." "I don't know," Bob replied. She seemed pretty angry. "Maybe we should what?" Victoria interrupted. "Apologize for trying to include her in a family business. Apologize for giving her opportunities she could never create on her own." I paused just outside the living room doorway, my chest tight with a mixture of hurt and disbelief. Even now, even after I'd explicitly told them I'd built the software myself, Victoria was still framing it as an opportunity she was giving me. "I'm leaving," I announced, stepping into view with my backpack clearly visible. They all turned to look at me, their expressions ranging from surprise to annoyance. "Where are you going?" Helen asked, though her tone suggested she wasn't particularly concerned about the answer. "I don't know yet," I said honestly, "but I'll figure it out." Victoria rolled her eyes. "This is so typical. Instead of having an adult conversation about our disagreement, you're running away like a teenager." I looked at her for a long moment, taking in her perfectly styled hair, her carefully curated outfit, her ring light still glowing softly in the background. For years I'd admired her confidence, her ability to command attention, her talent for making people believe in her vision. But now I could see something else underneath all that polish, a deep selfishness that allowed her to take credit for other people's work without a moment's hesitation. "You're right," I said finally. "I am running away, but not from an adult conversation. I'm running away from people who think that stealing my work and calling me toxic for objecting makes them good family members." Victoria's face flushed red again. "I'm not stealing anything from you." "God, you're so paranoid. Then launch Rivera Family Solutions without my software, I interrupted. If I'm just being paranoid about ownership, then you should have no problem building your family business using someone else's work. The room fell silent. Victoria opened her mouth, then closed it again, clearly struggling to find a response that didn't involve admitting she needed my software to make her business plan work. That's what I thought, I said quietly. I turned and walked toward the front door, my footsteps echoing in the marble foyer. Behind me, I heard Victoria's voice rise again, but I couldn't make out the words over the sound of my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. The front door closed behind me with a soft click, sealing me out of the house where I'd lived for the past 3 months. The late afternoon heat hit me immediately, the Arizona sun beating down on the manicured landscape of their Scottsdale neighborhood. Perfect lawns stretched in every direction, punctuated by Mediterranean-style mansions and imported palm trees. I stood on their circular driveway for a moment, looking back at the house. Through the large windows, I could see my family still in the living room, their heads close together in animated conversation. They probably wouldn't even notice I was gone until dinner time. I pulled out my phone and opened my rideshare app, requesting a pickup to downtown Phoenix. The driver would be there in 8 minutes. Just enough time to take one last look at the life I was leaving behind, the life where my contributions were simultaneously essential and worthless, where my family's love came with conditions I was apparently incapable of meeting. The car arrived exactly on time, a silver sedan with tinted windows that reflected the desert landscape. I climbed into the back seat, gave the driver the address of a budget motel I'd found online, and watched my childhood home shrink in the rearview mirror until it disappeared entirely. As we drove through the winding streets of Scottsdale, past golf courses and shopping centers and other monuments to Arizona wealth, I felt something unexpected settling in my chest. Not sadness, not anger, but a strange sense of relief. For the first time in months, I didn't have to worry about managing other people's expectations or defending my right to my own work. The software was mine, the vision was mine, the late nights of coding and testing and debugging were mine. And now, finally, the decisions about what to do with all of that work would be mine too. I pulled out my laptop and opened a new document, typing 4 words that felt like the beginning of something entirely new. Rivera Property Solutions, Business Plan. Then I crossed out Rivera and replaced it with Phoenix. Phoenix Property Solutions, Business Plan. It had a nice ring to it. The Desert Inn Motel wasn't much to look at from the outside. Faded pink stucco walls, a flickering neon sign missing half its letters, and a small kidney-shaped pool that looked like it hadn't been cleaned since the Clinton administration. But it was $42 a night, and it was available immediately, which made it perfect for someone who'd just walked away from their entire life with nothing but a backpack and wounded pride. The desk clerk, a weathered man in his 60s with kind eyes and calloused hands, didn't ask questions when I paid cash for 3 nights. He just handed me a key attached to a plastic palm tree and pointed toward the back of the complex. Room 127 was tucked between a vending machine that hummed ominously and a laundry room that smelled like industrial bleach and broken dreams. The room itself was exactly what $42 a night could buy. 2 double beds with scratchy floral comforters, a television that probably predated streaming services, and air conditioning that wheezed like an elderly chain smoker. But it had Wi-Fi, a desk of sorts, and most importantly, it was mine. No family meetings about business strategies I'd never agreed to. No ring lights and fake enthusiasm for social media audiences. Just me, my laptop, and the software that was about to become my lifeline. I sat on the edge of the bed, closest to the window, and pulled out my phone to check my bank account. The number staring back at me was smaller than I'd hoped, but not catastrophic. After paying for the motel room, I had enough for maybe 2 weeks of basic survival if I was careful. 2 weeks to figure out how to turn my property management software into actual income instead of theoretical family business opportunities. The first thing I did was create a new email account completely separate from anything my family could access. Cassie, phoenixsolutions@gmail.com. It felt official, professional, like the beginning of something that belonged entirely to me. Then I spent the next several hours systematically changing passwords on every account related to my software development work. My cloud storage, my development environments, my domain registrations, my social media accounts that barely existed anyway. Victoria might think she could launch Rivera Family Solutions without my permission, but she was about to discover that my software wasn't something she could simply copy and paste into her business plan. Every line of code was protected by version control systems she didn't understand, hosted on servers she couldn't access, and documented in technical specifications that might as well have been written in ancient Greek for all the sense they'd make to someone whose idea of programming was choosing Instagram filters. By midnight, I'd secured everything that mattered and started drafting a real business plan for Phoenix Property Solutions. Not the vague, marketing-heavy nonsense Victoria had been spouting for her cameras, but an actual roadmap with market analysis, competitive landscape research, revenue projections, and implementation timelines. The kind of document that demonstrated I understood exactly what I was building and why it mattered. The research phase took me deep into forums, where property managers complained about existing software solutions, outdated interfaces that looked like they'd been designed in 1995, customer service systems that required tenants to call during business hours for basic maintenance requests, payment processing that charged ridiculous fees and took days to transfer funds, reporting dashboards that generated more confusion than clarity. Every complaint I read reinforced what I already knew from my own experience managing rental properties during college. The industry was stuck using tools that had been designed by people who'd never actually dealt with a clogged toilet at midnight, or a tenant who insisted on paying rent in cash despite living in the 21st century. There was a massive opportunity for someone who understood both the technical and practical sides of property management. I wrote until my eyes burned, and my fingers cramped, stopping only to walk to the vending machine for overpriced snacks and caffeinated beverages that tasted like they'd been formulated in a laboratory. By the time I finally crawled under the scratchy motel comforter, I had 47 pages of market research, competitive analysis, and strategic planning. It wasn't pretty, but it was thorough, and it was mine. The next morning, I woke up to 17 missed calls from my family. Victoria had apparently discovered that she couldn't access any of the development environments for my software, and the panic in her voicemails was almost satisfying. Almost, because underneath the anger and accusations, I could hear something that sounded like genuine fear. She'd probably already promised her followers and potential investors that Rivera Family Solutions was launching soon, and now she was realizing she had no actual product to deliver. I didn't call back. Instead, I walked to a coffee shop 3 blocks away and spent the morning researching freelance opportunities while nursing a single cup of coffee that I made last for 2 hours. The barista, a college student with purple hair and tired eyes, seemed to understand the universal code of people trying to make their money stretch, and she didn't hassle me about camping at a corner table with my laptop. By lunch, I'd submitted applications to 6 different freelance platforms, highlighting my experience with property management systems, database design, and user interface development. The pay rates weren't spectacular, but they were real money for real work, which felt revolutionary after months of pouring unpaid labor into what I'd thought was my own project. The first response came within hours. A property management company in Tucson needed help integrating their tenant communication system with their accounting software. It was exactly the kind of technical challenge I could solve in my sleep, and they were willing to pay $75 an hour for remote work. I accepted the project immediately, and spent the rest of the afternoon diving into their existing systems, mapping data flows, and designing integration protocols. It felt incredible to be working on something where my contributions were valued and compensated appropriately. No family dynamics to navigate, no concerns about credit or ownership, just a client with a problem and me with the skills to solve it. The work was complex enough to be interesting, but straightforward enough that I could deliver results quickly, which meant building a reputation that would lead to more opportunities. That evening, I treated myself to dinner at a small Mexican restaurant within walking distance of the motel. Nothing fancy, just street tacos and a cerveza that tasted like victory. While I ate, I checked my phone and found a text message from Lauren Hayes, my former best friend who'd been carefully maintaining relationships with both me and Victoria since we'd all graduated from college together. "Hey girl, heard about the family drama. Coffee tomorrow? I have something you need to see." Lauren was one of those people who somehow managed to stay connected to everyone's business without ever taking sides publicly. She worked in social media marketing for a mid-sized agency, which meant she understood both the technical and promotional aspects of building online businesses. If she had something to show me, it was probably worth seeing. We met the next morning at a Starbucks near her office. Lauren looked exactly like she always did, professionally casual in a way that suggested she'd figured out the secret to looking put together without trying too hard. Her expression, however, was more serious than usual, and she kept glancing around the coffee shop like she was worried about being overheard. "Okay," she said after we'd settled into a corner booth with our drinks. "I need to show you something, but you have to promise me you won't do anything crazy when you see it." I raised an eyebrow. Define crazy. Like, don't immediately call Victoria and start screaming. Don't post angry responses on social media. Don't send threatening emails to her business partners. Basically, don't give her ammunition to paint you as the unstable sister who can't handle family disagreements professionally. The fact that Lauren felt the need to specify these boundaries told me everything I needed to know about how Victoria had been framing our conflict to their mutual connections. I was already being positioned as the emotional, unreasonable one, while she played the role of the long-suffering sister trying to maintain family relationships despite my difficult personality. "I promise," I said, though my stomach was already churning with anticipation. "Show me." Lauren pulled out her phone and opened Instagram, navigating to Victoria's business account. The most recent post was a carousel of images showing a sleek presentation deck titled Rivera Family Solutions, Revolutionizing Property Management Through Innovation and Heart. The first slide showed Victoria in a crisp white blazer, pointing confidently at a wall-mounted screen that displayed what were unmistakably screenshots of my software interface. My color scheme, my navigation layout, my carefully designed user experience flows. The second slide featured testimonials from beta clients that I'd never heard of, praising the intuitive design and comprehensive feature set of Rivera Family Solutions' proprietary platform. But it was the third slide that made my blood run cold. A detailed breakdown of the software's capabilities, presented as Victoria's original innovation: automated rent collection with customizable late fee structures, intelligent maintenance request routing based on priority levels and contractor availability, integrated communication tools that allowed property managers to send targeted messages to specific tenant segments, real-time reporting dashboards that tracked everything from occupancy rates to maintenance costs. Every single feature was something I'd designed, coded, and tested myself. Every workflow optimization, every user interface decision, every integration point had been the result of my research and development work. But in Victoria's presentation, these innovations were attributed to months of collaborative research with industry professionals and cutting-edge development by our technical team. "Technical team," I said out loud, my voice barely controlled. "She's calling herself a technical team now." Lauren winced. "It gets worse. Keep scrolling." The fourth slide showed a launch timeline with specific dates and milestones. Rivera Family Solutions would begin onboarding premium clients next month, with a full market launch planned for 6 weeks later. The pricing structure was aggressive but reasonable, positioned just below existing enterprise solutions while offering significantly more functionality. The fifth slide was what really drove the knife home. A professional headshot of Victoria smiling confidently next to a quote that read, "As the founder and CEO of Rivera Family Solutions, I'm passionate about bringing innovative technology to an industry that's been stuck in the past for too long. Our platform represents the future of property management, designed by professionals who understand both the technical challenges and the human element of managing rental properties." I stared at the screen for a long moment, processing what I was seeing. It wasn't just that Victoria was planning to steal my software. She'd already stolen it, at least in the court of public opinion. Her followers were sharing the post, commenting about how excited they were to see her expanding into new business ventures, praising her innovation and entrepreneurial spirit. "There's more," Lauren said quietly, swiping to show me Victoria's Instagram stories from the past 2 days. She's been doing live sessions talking about the development process, sharing behind-the-scenes content about building a tech startup from scratch. The story highlights showed Victoria in various stage scenarios, typing dramatically on a laptop that was clearly just displaying a stock photo of code, standing in front of a whiteboard covered in flowcharts that looked like she'd copied them from a project management textbook, having animated phone conversations with supposed developers and potential investors. In one particularly galling clip, she was showing off printed screenshots of my software interface while explaining how she'd spent countless hours perfecting the user experience and working closely with developers to ensure every feature met her exacting standards. The screenshots were literally printouts of my work, down to the placeholder text I'd used during development testing. She's been posting content like this for 3 days straight, Lauren said, building up momentum for the official launch announcement. Her engagement numbers are through the roof because her audience loves seeing her branch out into tech entrepreneurship. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, trying to process the magnitude of what Victoria had done. This wasn't just family drama or a misunderstanding about collaboration. This was systematic, calculated theft of intellectual property, executed with the kind of strategic precision that suggested she'd been planning it for weeks. How is she planning to actually deliver the software to clients? I asked, opening my eyes to look at Lauren directly. She doesn't have access to my development environments anymore. She can't even log into the hosting servers. Lauren's expression became even more uncomfortable. That's the thing I was afraid to tell you. She's been reaching out to developers on freelance platforms, showing them your interface screenshots and asking for quotes to replicate the functionalities of her existing prototype. She's telling people that her previous developer quit unexpectedly, and she needs someone to rebuild the system from scratch. The audacity was breathtaking. Victoria was literally trying to hire other developers to recreate my software based on screenshots, all while publicly claiming that she'd been the driving force behind its original development. She was positioning herself as the visionary entrepreneur who'd been betrayed by an unreliable technical contractor, rather than the family member who was stealing months of unpaid work from her own sister. Have any developers actually responded to her requests? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer.
Hugh, Lauren admitted.
I've been monitoring the freelance postings because I figured you'd want to know what she was up to. Most of the responses are either way outside her budget range or from overseas developers who probably won't be able to deliver anything close to your quality standards. But there are a couple of local developers who seem interested, especially after she showed them her social media following and talked about the marketing potential of working with an influencer. I leaned back in the booth, staring up at the coffee shop's exposed brick ceiling while my mind raced through the implications. Victoria was essentially crowdfunding the theft of my intellectual property, using her social media platform to generate excitement and credibility for a product that didn't belong to her. Even if she couldn't successfully recreate my software, she was already damaging my ability to launch Phoenix Property Solutions by establishing Rivera Family Solutions as the first to market innovation in this space. There's something else, Lauren said hesitantly. I probably shouldn't tell you this, but I think you need to know. Yesterday, Victoria posted in a private Facebook group for local women entrepreneurs, asking for advice about dealing with family members who try to sabotage business ventures out of jealousy. She didn't mention your name specifically, but it was pretty obvious she was talking about you. What did she say? That she'd been working on a tech startup with a family member who was supposed to handle the technical development, but this person had become increasingly controlling and paranoid about ownership issues. She said you were threatening to sabotage the launch unless she gave you equity you hadn't earned, and she was asking the group for advice about how to protect her business from family members who felt entitled to credit for collaborative projects. I felt a familiar tightness in my chest, the same sensation I'd experienced during countless childhood arguments, where Victoria would somehow turn every conflict into evidence of my fundamental character flaws. She had a gift for reframing situations so that her actions seemed reasonable, and my responses seemed disproportionate, even when she was the one who'd initiated the conflict in the first place. How did the group respond? I asked, though I dreaded the answer. Mostly supportive of Victoria, unfortunately. A lot of advice about setting clear boundaries with family members, suggestions to get everything in writing for future projects, sympathy about how hard it is to mix business with personal relationships. A few people shared their own horror stories about family members who felt entitled to credit or compensation for projects they'd barely contributed to. The irony was almost funny, if it weren't so devastating. Victoria was getting advice about protecting herself from family members who felt entitled to credit they hadn't earned, while simultaneously stealing credit for work she'd never done. She'd managed to position herself as the victim of exactly the behavior she was engaging in, which was such a perfect example of her manipulative skills that I almost had to admire the artistry of it. Did anyone in the group question her version of events? I asked. One person asked for more details about the family members' specific contributions to the project, but Victoria kept her response pretty vague. Said that collaboration makes it hard to parse out individual contributions, and that some people have trouble accepting that business success requires skills beyond just technical ability. I nodded slowly, understanding exactly how Victoria had navigated that potential challenge. By keeping the details vague, she avoided having to lie outright about my contributions while still implying that my technical work was just one small piece of a larger collaborative effort. Anyone reading her responses would come away with the impression that I was trying to claim credit for a project that had been primarily her vision and initiative. Lauren, I said carefully, why are you showing me all of this? I mean, I appreciate the heads up, but you could have just stayed out of it entirely. She sighed and stirred her coffee absently, avoiding eye contact, because I've been watching Victoria operate for years, and I've seen her do this kind of thing before. Not exactly this, but similar. Taking credit for group projects in college, positioning herself as the leader of initiatives that other people actually organized, rewriting history to make herself look more central to successes than she actually was. So why didn't you ever call her out on it? Because she's really good at making people believe her version of events, and because it was easier to just go along with it than to create drama. But this is different, Cassie. This isn't about getting extra credit on a college assignment or looking good on social media. This is your actual career, your actual work, your actual future. I couldn't just watch her steal that from you without at least making sure you knew what was happening. I felt a wave of gratitude toward Lauren that was complicated by years of watching her choose neutrality over truth in conflicts involving Victoria. She was trying to do the right thing now, but only because the stakes had finally gotten high enough that her conscience outweighed her conflict avoidance. What do you think I should do? I asked. Honestly, I think you should document everything you can about your role in developing the software, and then you should focus on building Phoenix Property Solutions into something that makes Rivera Family Solutions look like amateur hour. Victoria's good at marketing and social media, but she's not actually good at business. She doesn't understand technical development timelines, she doesn't know how to manage complex projects, and she definitely doesn't understand the property management industry well enough to deliver on the promises she's making. Lauren was right, of course. Victoria's strength had always been her ability to generate excitement and enthusiasm for ideas, but she'd never demonstrated the sustained focus and attention to detail required to execute complex projects successfully. Her social media presence was built on carefully curated highlights, not the unglamorous daily work of actually building something substantial. The problem is, I said, she's already established herself as the innovator in this space. Even if I launch Phoenix Property Solutions with better software and more industry knowledge, a lot of people are going to see it as me copying her idea instead of her stealing mine. Maybe, Lauren acknowledged, but here's the thing about Victoria's approach: it's not sustainable. She can generate short-term excitement and maybe even sign up some initial clients, but she can't deliver the long-term value that actually makes businesses successful. When her clients start experiencing problems with the software she's trying to cobble together from screenshots, when they realize that her customer service consists of posting inspirational quotes on Instagram, when they need technical support that requires actual expertise instead of motivational speaking, that's when Phoenix Property Solutions will have the chance to demonstrate what real value looks like. I finished my coffee and stared out the window at the Phoenix traffic, watching people navigate their morning commutes with the kind of purposeful energy I envied. They all seemed to know where they were going and why, while I was sitting in a coffee shop trying to figure out how to rebuild my professional life from scratch, while my sister systematically dismantled everything I'd worked for. I need to get back to work, I said finally. I've got a project due for a client in Tucson, and I can't afford to miss deadlines if I'm going to make rent next month. Lauren nodded, but her expression suggested she had more to say. Cassie, can I give you one piece of advice? Don't make this about proving Victoria wrong or exposing her lies. Make it about building something so good that the truth becomes obvious to anyone who matters. Focus on creating value for your clients, not on fighting with your family. It was good advice, even though every fiber of my being wanted to screenshot Victoria's Instagram posts and blast them across every platform with detailed explanations of why each claim was false. The mature professional response was to channel my anger into building something better than anything Victoria could steal or replicate. I walked back to the Desert Inn motel with Lauren's words echoing in my mind, but also with a growing sense of determination that felt more solid than anything I'd experienced in months. Victoria might have a head start in the court of public opinion, but she'd made a crucial mistake. She'd built her entire strategy around stealing something she didn't understand, from someone she'd underestimated. The technical work was mine. The industry knowledge was mine. The relationships with actual property managers who understood real problems were mine. Victoria could steal my screenshots and copy my interface design, but she couldn't steal the months of research, testing, and refinement that had gone into creating something that actually worked. Back in room 127, I opened my laptop and pulled up the project for my Tucson client. The integration work was proceeding smoothly, and they'd already expressed interest in additional projects if this one went well. Real work, real money, real relationships with people who valued technical expertise over social media followers. As I coded, I found myself thinking about something my college professor had said during a particularly challenging software engineering course. The best revenge against people who don't understand your work, he'd told our class, is to keep doing it better than they ever could. Victoria could have my screenshots, my interface designs, even my feature specifications. But she couldn't have my ability to solve problems, to write clean code, to understand the complex relationships between technology and business operations. Those skills belonged to me, and no amount of social media manipulation could change that. I spent the rest of the day working on the Tucson integration and researching potential clients for Phoenix Property Solutions. By evening, I had a pipeline of prospects and a growing confidence that Lauren was right. This wasn't about fighting Victoria for credit over old work. This was about building something new that would make the question of ownership irrelevant. The software I'd originally developed for what I'd thought was a family business had been good, but it had also been constrained by trying to accommodate Victoria's marketing vision and my parents' business preferences. Phoenix Property Solutions could be exactly what the market needed, without compromise or committee input from people who'd never managed a rental property in their lives. As I fell asleep that night in the scratchy motel bed, I wasn't thinking about Instagram posts or family drama or stolen screenshots. I was thinking about code architecture and user interface improvements, and all the ways I could make Phoenix Property Solutions better than anything Victoria could imagine, let alone replicate. The best revenge, I was learning, wasn't exposure or confrontation, it was excellence. 3 weeks after moving into the Desert Inn motel, I'd established a routine that felt surprisingly sustainable. Wake up at 6, walk to the coffee shop for my daily 2-hour workspace rental, work on client projects until noon, return to the motel for lunch and administrative tasks, then spend the afternoon either networking or working on Phoenix Property Solutions. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine, and every day brought small victories that reminded me why I'd chosen independence over family approval. The Tucson integration project had led to 2 additional contracts, and my freelance reputation was growing steadily. Property management companies, it turned out, were desperate for developers who actually understood their industry instead of trying to force generic business software into specialized workflows. My college experience managing rentals had given me insights that pure programmers lacked, and word was spreading through professional networks that there was someone who could bridge the gap between technical capability and practical application. I was reviewing proposals for a new client when my phone buzzed with a notification that made my stomach drop. Victoria had tagged me in an Instagram story, the first direct acknowledgement of my existence since I'd left their house. My finger hovered over the notification for several seconds before curiosity overcame my better judgment. The story was a video of Victoria sitting in what looked like a professional conference room, her hair perfectly styled and her makeup camera ready despite the supposedly candid nature of the recording. She was speaking directly to her phone with the kind of practiced sincerity that influencers used when they wanted to appear vulnerable and authentic. "Hey everyone," she began, her voice carrying just the right amount of exhaustion mixed with determination. "I wanted to give you guys a quick update on the Rivera Family Solutions launch, because transparency is super important to me, and I know you've been following this journey with me." She paused for effect, running her hand through her hair in a gesture that looked spontaneous but was probably rehearsed. As many of you know, I've been working on this project with my sister Cassie, who's incredibly talented with technology and programming. We've been collaborating for months on what we thought would be an amazing family business venture. My chest tightened as I realized where this was heading. Unfortunately, Victoria continued, her expression shifting to something that looked like disappointed sadness. Sometimes people you love and trust can surprise you in ways you never expected. Without going into too much detail, because I believe in protecting family privacy even when it's difficult, Cassie has decided that she doesn't want to be part of Rivera Family Solutions anymore. The way she phrased it made it sound like I'd arbitrarily decided to abandon a collaborative project, rather than refusing to let her steal my work. The casual mention of my technical talents, followed by the implication that I'd selfishly walked away from our collaboration, was exactly the kind of narrative manipulation Victoria excelled at. "I'm honestly heartbroken about this," she said, and for a moment her voice actually cracked with what sounded like genuine emotion. "Family is everything to me, and the idea of moving forward with this business without Cassie feels really, really hard. But I also have a responsibility to all the clients who are counting on us, all the property managers who've been waiting for the innovative solutions we've promised." She held up her phone to show what looked like a busy email inbox, though the screen was angled so that none of the actual messages were readable. "We've got over 50 inquiries from potential clients, people who are excited about what Rivera Family Solutions can offer. So even though this situation with my family is painful and complicated, I can't let that stop me from delivering on our commitments." The video continued for another minute, with Victoria explaining how she was pivoting the business model to focus on consulting and strategic planning while partnering with amazing developers to handle the technical implementation. She managed to make it sound like this had always been the plan, rather than a desperate attempt to salvage a business built on stolen intellectual property. But it was the final 30 seconds that really drove the knife home. Victoria's expression shifted from sad determination to something that looked like reluctant disappointment. "I want to be really clear about something," she said, looking directly into the camera with the kind of earnest eye contact that suggested she was about to reveal an uncomfortable truth. "The narrative that's starting to circulate about Rivera Family Solutions isn't entirely accurate. Some people are claiming that our software and business concepts were developed by a single person, but that's just not how collaboration works in the real world." She paused again, letting that statement settle before continuing. "When you're building something as a team, especially a family team, everyone contributes different skills and perspectives. Yes, Cassie did a lot of the technical programming work, and she's incredibly talented at that. But the vision, the market research, the user experience design, the business strategy, the client relationships, those were collaborative efforts that involved multiple people over many months." I stared at my phone screen in disbelief. Victoria was actively rewriting history, creating a version of events where my months of independent research and development had somehow been a collaborative effort, involving her marketing expertise and business acumen. She was positioning herself as the strategic visionary, while reducing my contributions to technical programming work, as if writing code was just typing rather than solving complex problems and designing elegant solutions. "I'm not going to get into a public dispute with family members," Victoria concluded, her voice taking on a tone of mature restraint. "That's not who I am, and it's not what our clients deserve. I just want people to understand that business is complicated, collaboration is complicated, and sometimes the stories you hear don't include all the context you need to understand what really happened." The video ended with Victoria smiling sadly at the camera before the story faded to black. Within minutes, the comments were flooding in. Her followers were praising her maturity and professionalism, expressing sympathy for the difficult family situation, and offering encouragement for her decision to move forward despite personal setbacks. Several comments specifically mentioned how impressive it was that she was protecting my privacy, even though I'd apparently created problems for the business. A few followers shared their own stories about family members who'd become difficult to work with once money was involved. One comment that particularly stung read, "It's so hard when family members get jealous of your success and try to take credit for collaborative work. You're handling this with such grace." I sat in my motel room staring at my phone for several minutes, processing what Victoria had just done. She'd managed to publicly address the intellectual property theft without actually denying it, while simultaneously painting herself as the mature victim of my unreasonable behavior. Anyone who might have heard rumors about our conflict would now have Victoria's version of events, complete with sympathetic framing and just enough vague details to seem credible. More importantly, she'd established a narrative that would make it extremely difficult for me to launch Phoenix Property Solutions without appearing to validate her claims about my character. If I started marketing software that looked similar to what she'd been promoting for Rivera Family Solutions, it would seem like proof that I was indeed trying to steal credit for collaborative work. The strategic brilliance of Victoria's approach was almost admirable. She'd created a situation where my silence looked like admission of guilt, but any attempt to defend myself would look like exactly the kind of family drama she was claiming to rise above. She'd positioned herself as the reasonable party while making me the antagonist in a story her followers were already primed to believe. But Victoria had made one crucial mistake in her carefully crafted narrative. She'd claimed that the software development had been collaborative work involving multiple contributors, which meant she was asserting joint ownership of intellectual property that was provably and exclusively mine. That wasn't just misleading marketing, it was potentially actionable fraud. I opened my laptop and began documenting everything I could remember about the development timeline for my property management software. Date stamps on code commits, emails about specific features, screenshots of development environments showing my exclusive access to all systems. If Victoria wanted to claim collaborative ownership, she'd need to provide evidence of her contributions beyond social media posts and inspirational quotes. The documentation process took most of the evening, but it was weirdly therapeutic. Going through months of development logs reminded me of all the problems I'd solved, all the late nights spent debugging complex algorithms, all the user interface iterations that had gradually evolved into something genuinely useful. This wasn't abstract programming work, it was a sophisticated solution to real industry problems, created by someone who understood both the technical and practical challenges of property management. By the time I finished organizing my evidence, I had a comprehensive file that clearly demonstrated exclusive ownership of every aspect of the software Victoria was claiming to have co-developed. Code repositories showing only my contributions, design documents written entirely in my voice, testing logs from my personal development environment, even screenshots of user feedback from property managers I'd interviewed during the research phase. More importantly, I had evidence that Victoria had never accessed any of the development tools, never submitted code contributions, never participated in technical design discussions, and never demonstrated understanding of the underlying architecture that made the software actually function. Her contributions to the project could be summarized as expressed enthusiasm during family meetings and suggested marketing strategies I never implemented. The next morning brought an email that changed everything. Marcus Thompson, the founder and CEO of Desert Peak Property Management, had seen my freelance profile and wanted to discuss a potential consulting contract. Desert Peak managed over 1,500 rental units across Phoenix and Tucson, specializing in mid-range residential properties for working professionals and young families. Marcus had started the company 12 years earlier after getting frustrated with the property management firm that handled his own rental investments. Like many successful entrepreneurs, he'd identified a problem in his personal experience and built a business around solving it better than existing options. Desert Peak had grown steadily through word-of-mouth referrals and reputation for actually responding to tenant concerns promptly and professionally. We met for coffee at a place near his office in Central Phoenix, a no-nonsense establishment that served strong coffee to working professionals who didn't have time for elaborate drink preparations. Marcus was exactly what I'd expected from his email communication, direct, practical, and focused on results rather than appearances. He wore a simple button-down shirt and khakis that suggested he was comfortable moving between office meetings and property inspections without worrying about maintaining a particular image. "I've been watching your work on some of the freelance platforms," he said after we'd settled into a corner booth with our coffee. "The integration you did for Tucson Property Services was exactly what they needed, and they've been raving about your understanding of the operational side of property management." I nodded, trying to project confidence despite the fact that my entire professional wardrobe was currently limited to what could fit in a backpack. I think a lot of developers approach property management software like it's just another database application, but the workflows are actually quite complex. Tenant communication isn't the same as customer service, maintenance scheduling has to account for emergency priorities, and financial reporting needs to handle security deposits, prorated rent, and variable late fees. Marcus smiled, the kind of expression that suggested I'd just said something he'd been waiting years to hear from a technology consultant. "We've been through 3 different software implementations in the past 5 years, and every time the developers promise they understand our needs, then deliver something that makes our jobs harder instead of easier. He pulled out his phone and showed me screenshots of their current system, a clunky interface that looked like it had been designed by people who'd never actually managed rental properties. The tenant communication module required multiple clicks to send basic updates, the maintenance request system couldn't handle emergency prioritization, and the financial reporting generated summaries that were technically accurate but practically useless. We're spending more time fighting with our software than we are managing properties. Marcus continued. My office staff has to maintain parallel spreadsheets just to track information that should be automatically generated by the system. Our maintenance coordinators print out work orders because the mobile interface is too slow and unreliable for field use. It's insane. I studied the screenshots, immediately identifying dozens of workflow inefficiencies that could be solved with better software architecture. This was exactly the kind of challenge I'd been designing Phoenix Property Solutions to address, real problems faced by real property managers who needed technology that supported their work instead of complicating it. What would ideal property management software look like to you? I asked, genuinely curious about Marcus's perspective. He leaned back in his chair and considered the question for a moment. Honestly, it would feel invisible. Tenants could submit maintenance requests and get automatic updates about scheduling and completion without calling our office. Property managers could see everything they need to know about a property's status from a single dashboard. Maintenance coordinators could update work orders from their phones while they're actually on site. Financial reporting would generate the summaries we need for owners and investors without requiring manual data entry. Marcus was describing almost exactly what I'd built for my original family business project, but his perspective was informed by years of operational experience that my family had completely lacked. He understood which features mattered because he'd actually lived with the consequences of bad software design. That's definitely achievable, I said, my excitement building as I realized how perfectly my existing work aligned with Desert Peak's needs. Most property management software fails because it's designed by people who think about data management instead of operational workflows. But if you start with understanding how property managers actually work, you can design technology that makes their jobs easier instead of harder. We spent the next hour discussing specific features and integration requirements. Marcus needed something that could handle their existing tenant database, interface with their accounting system, and provide mobile access for field staff. He also wanted automated communication tools that could send rent reminders, maintenance updates, and lease renewal notifications without requiring manual intervention from office staff. Everything he described was well within the scope of what I'd already developed, though it would require customization to match Desert Peak's specific workflows and integration with their existing systems. It was exactly the kind of project that could demonstrate the real-world value of Phoenix Property Solutions while generating enough revenue to move out of the Desert Inn motel. I have to ask, Marcus said as our meeting was winding down, are you the same Cassie Rivera who's been mentioned in connection with Rivera Family Solutions? I've seen some social media posts about a family business in the property management space. I felt my stomach tighten, but I'd been preparing for this question since Victoria's Instagram story. Yes, that's me. Rivera Family Solutions was supposed to be a collaboration with my sister, but we had fundamental disagreements about business direction and ownership. I'm now developing Phoenix Property Solutions as an independent venture. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. Family businesses can be complicated. What's your timeline for having a working system that we could pilot with a subset of our properties? The fact that he'd moved past the family drama question without requiring detailed explanations felt like a small miracle. Marcus was clearly more interested in practical results than industry gossip, which made him exactly the kind of client I wanted for Phoenix Property Solutions. I could have a pilot-ready version customized for your workflows within 6 weeks. I said, my confidence growing as I realized how achievable that timeline actually was. We'd start with maybe 50 units to test the core functionality, then expand gradually based on feedback and refinement. Marcus extended his hand across the table. Let's do it. I'll send you a consulting agreement this afternoon, and we can schedule a follow-up meeting next week to go over technical specifications and integration requirements. Walking back to my motel room after the meeting, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: genuine optimism about my professional future. Marcus represented exactly the kind of client relationship I'd been hoping to build, someone who understood the industry, valued technical expertise, and was willing to pay appropriately for solutions that actually solved real problems. More importantly, Desert Peak property management was substantial enough that a successful implementation would serve as a powerful case study for Phoenix Property Solutions. If I could demonstrate measurable improvements in operational efficiency for a company managing 1,500 units, other property management firms would take notice. That evening, I started working on a detailed project proposal for Marcus, incorporating everything we'd discussed about features, timelines, and integration requirements. The proposal process forced me to think systematically about pricing, which was both terrifying and empowering. I was finally putting a concrete value on my expertise instead of hoping family members would eventually recognize my contributions. The numbers were encouraging. Even at rates that were competitive with other consulting developers, this single contract would generate enough revenue to move into a proper apartment, upgrade my equipment, and establish Phoenix Property Solutions as a legitimate business rather than a survival strategy. As I worked on technical specifications and project timelines, my phone buzzed with another Instagram notification. Victoria had posted a new update about Rivera Family Solutions, this one featuring a slick promotional video that showcased the innovative platform she was preparing to launch. The video was professionally produced, with smooth transitions between screenshots of software interfaces that looked suspiciously similar to my original designs. Victoria appeared throughout the video, explaining features and benefits with the kind of confident authority that suggested she'd personally developed every line of code. But there was something different about this video compared to her previous posts. The software screenshots weren't quite right, the color schemes were slightly off, the navigation elements didn't align properly, and some of the interface text contained obvious grammatical errors that suggested non-native English speakers had been involved in the development process. Victoria had apparently succeeded in hiring offshore developers to recreate her existing prototype based on the screenshots she'd stolen from my work. The result looked functional from a marketing perspective, but anyone with actual software development experience would immediately recognize it as a rushed copy job rather than thoughtfully designed original work. I watched the video twice, taking notes about the discrepancies between Victoria's marketing claims and what was actually visible in the screenshots. Her version of the software was missing several key features I'd developed, included functionality that made no operational sense, and displayed obvious signs of hasty implementation by developers who didn't understand property management workflows. Most tellingly, the demonstration included a tenant portal that showed placeholder text in what looked like lorem ipsum, suggesting that Victoria's development team hadn't actually built working features so much as cosmetic interfaces that resembled functional software. The comment section was filled with enthusiasm from Victoria's followers, but also with questions from people who actually worked in property management. Several comments asked about specific technical capabilities, integration options, and pricing details that Victoria's video hadn't addressed. Her responses to these questions were vague and evasive, promising that detailed specifications would be available soon, and encouraging interested parties to stay tuned for the official launch announcement. I closed Instagram and returned to work on my proposal for Marcus, feeling more confident than ever that I'd made the right choice in walking away from Rivera Family Solutions. Victoria could steal my screenshots and hire developers to create superficial copies, but she couldn't replicate the months of research, testing, and refinement that had gone into creating software that actually worked. The next few days passed in a blur of productive activity. Marcus sent the consulting agreement as promised, along with detailed technical requirements and access to Desert Peak's existing systems for integration planning. The contract terms were more generous than I'd expected, reflecting both the complexity of the work and Marcus's understanding that quality development takes time and expertise. I also received inquiries from 2 other property management companies who'd heard about my work through professional networks. Word was spreading that there was a developer who actually understood the industry, and demand for my services was growing faster than I could handle as a solo consultant. By the end of the week, I had enough confirmed work to justify moving out of the Desert Inn motel and into a proper apartment. Nothing fancy, but a 1-bedroom place with dedicated office space and reliable internet that would allow me to work more efficiently and professionally. The apartment search process was surprisingly straightforward. Phoenix had plenty of options for young professionals, and my steady freelance income made me an attractive tenant despite my limited rental history in the area. I found a clean, modern unit in a complex that catered to remote workers and entrepreneurs, complete with a business center and conference rooms that residents could reserve for client meetings. Moving day was anticlimactic in the best possible way. Everything I owned still fit in the same backpack I'd carried out of my family's house, plus my laptop bag and a few additional items I'd acquired during my motel residency. No furniture to arrange, no decorative decisions to make, just the simple satisfaction of having a space that belonged entirely to me. That evening, I sat on the floor of my empty living room with my laptop, reviewing the technical specifications for Marcus's project and planning the development timeline. Outside my window, Phoenix stretched out in every direction, a sprawling city full of opportunities for someone willing to work for them. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Hey Cassie, this is Lauren, can you call me when you get a chance? Something happened with Victoria's launch that I think you need to know about." I dialed Lauren's number immediately, my stomach tightening with anticipation of whatever new development she'd discovered. "Okay," Lauren said without preamble when she answered, "so you know how Victoria has been promising this big launch announcement for Rivera Family Solutions? Well, she finally did a live demo for potential clients yesterday, and it was a complete disaster." "What kind of disaster?" "The kind where nothing actually worked. She was trying to demonstrate the tenant portal features, but the login system kept crashing. The maintenance request system generated error messages instead of work orders. The financial reporting module displayed random numbers that didn't add up to anything meaningful. It was obvious to everyone watching that this was barely functional prototype software, not the sophisticated platform she'd been marketing." I felt a complicated mixture of satisfaction and sympathy. I'd known that Victoria's rushed development approach would eventually lead to problems, but watching it happen in real time was both validating and uncomfortable. "How did she handle it?" I asked. "About as well as you'd expect. She tried to laugh it off as beta testing hiccups, and promised that all the issues would be resolved before the official launch. But there were actual property managers in the audience, and they were asking technical questions that she couldn't answer. It became really obvious really quickly that she didn't understand how her own software was supposed to work." Lauren paused, and I could hear her taking a deep breath before continuing. "Cassie, I think she's in real trouble. Word is spreading through industry networks that Rivera Family Solutions is essentially vaporware. People are starting to ask questions about her claims regarding development timelines and technical capabilities. And some of the developers she hired are apparently threatening to go public about being asked to recreate existing software based on screenshots." The implications were significant. If Victoria's technical incompetence became widely known in property management circles, it would damage not just Rivera Family Solutions but potentially any future business ventures she attempted in the industry. She'd burned through her credibility by overpromising and underdelivering, which was exactly what I'd warned would happen if she tried to rush unfinished software to market. "There's something else," Lauren continued. "Victoria called our parents yesterday, completely panicked about the failed demo. Apparently she's been telling potential investors that Rivera Family Solutions was ready for immediate deployment, and now she's facing questions about why the software doesn't actually work. Mom and Dad are starting to realize that maybe Victoria wasn't being entirely honest about her role in developing the platform." I closed my eyes, imagining the family conversation that must have taken place. Victoria frantically trying to explain why her revolutionary software couldn't perform basic functions, my parents slowly understanding that their golden child had built a business on foundations that didn't exist. "Did they ask about me?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. "Yeah," Lauren said quietly. "Victoria apparently suggested that the software problems were somehow related to you leaving the project, but Mom asked some pointed questions about what exactly Victoria had contributed beyond marketing and social media promotion. When Victoria couldn't provide specifics about her technical involvement, Dad started asking whether maybe they should try to reconcile with you and see if you'd be willing to help fix the problems." The irony was almost too perfect. After weeks of watching Victoria position herself as the visionary entrepreneur, and me as the difficult family member who'd abandoned a collaborative project, my parents were finally starting to understand that maybe the technical expert had been more essential than they'd realized. "What did Victoria say to that suggestion?" She shut it down immediately, said that bringing you back would validate your unreasonable demands about ownership and credit, and that she'd rather find other technical solutions than deal with family drama. But Cassie, I think she's running out of options. The developers she hired can't fix the fundamental problems with the software because they're trying to reverse engineer something they don't understand. She's promised clients a launch date that she can't meet, and she's burned through most of her marketing budget on promotional campaigns for a product that doesn't work. I sat quietly for a moment processing what Lauren had told me. Victoria's strategy of stealing my intellectual property and rushing to market had spectacularly backfired, leaving her with exactly the kind of professional disaster I'd tried to warn the family about months earlier. More importantly, her failure was creating exactly the kind of market opportunity I'd been hoping for with Phoenix Property Solutions. Property managers who'd been interested in Rivera Family Solutions would soon be looking for alternatives, and I was now in a position to offer them software that actually worked. Lauren, I said finally, I appreciate you keeping me informed about all this, but I need you to know that I'm not interested in getting pulled back into family drama. I'm building Phoenix Property Solutions as an independent business, and I'm not going to let Victoria's problems become my problems. I understand, Lauren replied. I just thought you should know what was happening, especially since Victoria might try to reach out to you directly if things get desperate enough. After we hung up, I sat in my empty apartment thinking about the strange trajectory that had brought me to this point. 3 months ago, I'd been the family member who supposedly couldn't handle business responsibilities. Now I was the one with satisfied clients, steady income, and a growing reputation in the industry, while Victoria was dealing with the consequences of building a business on someone else's work. The phone call with Lauren had clarified something important for me. This wasn't about proving Victoria wrong, or demonstrating that I'd been right all along. This was about building something sustainable and valuable, regardless of what happened with Rivera Family Solutions. I opened my laptop and returned to work on Marcus's project specifications, but with a new sense of urgency and purpose. Phoenix Property Solutions wasn't just my escape from family dysfunction, it was my opportunity to demonstrate what real innovation looked like in an industry that desperately needed better technology solutions. Victoria could keep the screenshots, the marketing videos, and the social media followers. I would keep the code, the industry knowledge, and the client relationships that actually mattered for building a successful business. The best response to theft, I was learning, wasn't confrontation or exposure. It was simply doing the work better than anyone else could steal it. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning, while I was debugging a particularly stubborn integration issue for Marcus's system. The subject line was innocuous enough, legal notice regarding intellectual property dispute. But the sender's address made my blood run cold, law office. Martinez at PhoenixLaw.com, representing Rivera Family Solutions LLC. I opened the attachment with trembling fingers, though I'd been half expecting something like this ever since Lauren had told me about Victoria's failed product demonstration. The legal document was 3 pages of dense text, but the core message was crystal clear. Rivera Family Solutions was claiming exclusive ownership of all intellectual property related to property management software developed during my employment with the company, and they were demanding that I immediately cease all development activities that infringed on their proprietary technology. The letter alleged that I had unlawfully appropriated trade secrets and proprietary software code when I left Rivera Family Solutions, and that my current work on Phoenix Property Solutions constituted willful violation of intellectual property rights and unfair business competition. They were demanding that I stop all business activities related to property management software, delete any code that resembled their platform, and pay damages for lost revenue and reputational harm caused by my alleged theft.
The audacity was breathtaking. Victoria was now claiming legal ownership of software she'd never written, couldn't understand, and had demonstrably failed to deliver to clients. She'd apparently convinced some lawyer that her marketing presentations and social media posts constituted sufficient evidence of intellectual property creation, despite having zero technical documentation or development records. But what really worried me wasn't the legal posturing, it was the timing. This cease and desist letter had arrived just 2 days before I was scheduled to present the completed Desert Peak system to Marcus and his team. If Victoria was trying to derail Phoenix Property Solutions at the moment it was gaining traction, she'd chosen her timing perfectly. I called David Park, a technology lawyer I'd found through online research, and scheduled an emergency consultation for that afternoon. David's office was in a modest downtown building that catered to small businesses and independent professionals, exactly the kind of legal practice that understood the realities of startup entrepreneurs rather than corporate executives. David was younger than I'd expected, probably early 30s, with the kind of practical energy that suggested he'd built his practice by solving real problems for real people rather than managing theoretical legal concepts. He read through Victoria's cease and desist letter while I sat across from his desk, trying not to fidget with nervous energy. "Okay," he said after finishing the document, "this is mostly legal intimidation tactics, but there are a few claims here that we need to address seriously. The good news is that intellectual property disputes are heavily dependent on documentation and evidence, which means whoever has the better paper trail usually wins." I pulled out my laptop and showed him the comprehensive file I'd compiled documenting my software development process. Code repositories with commit histories showing exclusive contributions from my accounts. Design documents written entirely in my voice and saved to my personal cloud storage. Email threads with potential clients discussing features I'd developed independently. Screenshots of development environments that only I had ever accessed. David reviewed the evidence systematically, occasionally asking questions about specific dates or technical details. His expression grew more confident as he worked through the documentation, and by the time he'd finished reviewing everything, he was smiling. "This is actually a pretty straightforward case," he said, leaning back in his chair. "You have comprehensive documentation proving that you developed this software independently, using your own resources on your own timeline. Rivera Family Solutions appears to have zero evidence of actual contribution to the technical development, and their own marketing materials actually support your version of events." He pulled up Victoria's Instagram posts on his computer, pointing to specific claims she'd made about the development timeline. "Look at this post from 6 weeks ago, where she talks about finalizing the user interface design. But your code repository shows that the UI was completed 3 months before that post. Either she's lying about her timeline, or she's claiming credit for work that was already finished." David was right. Victoria's social media documentation of the development process was actually evidence against her intellectual property claims, because it showed her talking about contributing to work that had already been completed weeks or months earlier. "What about her claim that I was employed by Rivera Family Solutions?" I asked. "There was never any formal employment agreement, but we did discuss the possibility of working together as a family business." "Employment requires documentation," David replied. "Pay stubs, tax forms, employment contracts, official job responsibilities. Talking about potential future collaboration isn't the same as establishing an employment relationship, especially when no money changed hands and no formal agreements were signed." He opened a new document on his computer and began drafting a response to Victoria's lawyer. "We're going to send a very polite but firm reply explaining that Miss Rivera appears to be confused about the ownership of intellectual property she did not create, and that any attempt to interfere with your legitimate business activities will result in counterclaims for harassment and unfair business interference." The tone David used was professional but unmistakably confident, the kind of legal language that suggested we had strong grounds for our position and weren't intimidated by baseless threats. He included specific references to my documentation, pointed out the inconsistencies in Victoria's timeline claims, and noted that Rivera Family Solutions had provided zero evidence of actual intellectual property development. "How long will it take to resolve this?" I asked, thinking about my upcoming presentation to Marcus and the other clients who were waiting for Phoenix Property Solutions to launch. "Probably a few weeks," David said. "Most of these disputes get resolved quickly once both sides exchange evidence and realize who actually has the stronger case. Your documentation is so comprehensive that I doubt Rivera Family Solutions will want to pursue this through formal litigation, especially since their own marketing materials undermine their legal claims." I left David's office feeling more confident about the legal aspects of the dispute, but still worried about the practical implications. Even if Victoria's intellectual property claims were baseless, the mere existence of a legal challenge could make potential clients nervous about working with Phoenix Property Solutions. Property management companies were risk-averse by nature, and they might prefer to wait until any legal uncertainties were resolved before committing to new software implementations. That evening, I called Marcus to give him a heads up about the situation. I'd been dreading this conversation, imagining how he might react to learning that his new software consultant was involved in a legal dispute with family members. But Marcus's response surprised me. "Honestly, Cassie, this actually makes me more confident about working with you, not less," he said, after I'd explained the cease and desist letter. "If your sister is going to these lengths to prevent you from competing with her, it suggests that she knows your software is significantly better than whatever she's trying to build." Marcus had a point. Victoria's legal intimidation tactics were essentially an admission that she couldn't compete with Phoenix Property Solutions on technical merit, so she was trying to eliminate the competition through legal harassment instead of market innovation. Plus, Marcus continued, I've been doing some research about Rivera Family Solutions since we started working together. The word in industry circles is that their product demonstration was a complete disaster, and several potential clients are actively looking for alternatives now. If anything, this legal dispute is going to generate publicity that helps people understand the difference between real software development and marketing vaporware. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. David's response to Victoria's lawyer was apparently effective, because I didn't receive any follow-up legal threats. Meanwhile, word about the intellectual property dispute had begun circulating through property management networks, generating exactly the kind of attention Marcus had predicted. 3 different property management companies reached out to inquire about Phoenix Property Solutions, specifically mentioning that they'd heard about my conflict with Rivera Family Solutions and wanted to understand the technical differences between the 2 platforms. Each conversation reinforced my growing confidence that Victoria's legal intimidation had backfired spectacularly. The most interesting inquiry came from Jessica Martinez, the owner of Pinnacle Property Management in Scottsdale. Jessica managed high-end residential properties for wealthy investors, exactly the kind of clientele that Rivera Family Solutions had been targeting with their luxury-focused marketing approach. I was actually considering Rivera Family Solutions for our software upgrade, Jessica told me during our phone consultation, but after seeing their product demonstration and hearing about this ownership dispute, I started having serious doubts about their technical capabilities. Jessica had attended Victoria's disastrous live demo, and her description of the event was even more damaging than Lauren's second-hand account. According to Jessica, Victoria had spent the first 20 minutes of the presentation talking about her entrepreneurial journey and social media following, then attempted to demonstrate software features that either didn't work or produced obviously incorrect results. It was clear that she didn't understand how property management actually works, Jessica said. She kept talking about streamlining workflows and optimizing tenant experiences, but when people asked specific questions about security deposit handling or emergency maintenance protocols, she couldn't give coherent answers. More problematically for Victoria, several attendees had started asking technical questions that revealed the superficial nature of her software implementation. The tenant portal that looked functional in screenshots turned out to generate error messages when users tried to submit actual maintenance requests. The financial reporting system couldn't handle basic calculations like prorated rent or variable late fees. The maintenance scheduling module displayed appointment times that conflicted with contractor availability. By the end of the demo, it was obvious to everyone that this was cosmetic software designed to look impressive in marketing materials rather than functional technology designed to solve real business problems. Jessica concluded. When I heard that the actual developer had started her own company, I knew I wanted to explore that option instead. The conversation with Jessica crystallized something important for me. Victoria's theft of my intellectual property had actually created a market opportunity that wouldn't have existed otherwise. Her failed attempts to replicate my work had demonstrated to potential clients exactly why technical expertise mattered, while her legal harassment had generated publicity that established Phoenix Property Solutions as the legitimate alternative to Rivera Family Solutions vaporware. I spent the rest of the week preparing for a series of client presentations, including the scheduled demonstration for Marcus's team and new consultations with the companies that had reached out after hearing about the intellectual property dispute. Each presentation was an opportunity to showcase not just the technical capabilities of Phoenix Property Solutions, but also the industry knowledge and operational understanding that distinguished real software development from marketing-driven product claims. The presentation for Desert Peak Property Management went exactly as I'd hoped. Marcus's team included property managers, maintenance coordinators, and office staff who would actually be using the software on a daily basis, and their questions were informed by years of practical experience with the operational challenges of managing rental properties. When I demonstrated the tenant communication system, they immediately understood how automated maintenance updates would reduce the volume of phone calls to their office. When I showed them the maintenance scheduling module, they recognized how intelligent contractor routing would minimize travel time and emergency response delays. When I walked through the financial reporting dashboard, they could see how automated calculations would eliminate the manual spreadsheet work that currently consumed hours of their administrative staff's time.
"This is exactly what we've been needing for years," said Maria Santos, Desert Peak's lead property manager. "Every other software system we've tried feels like it was designed by people who've never actually managed rental properties. This feels like it was designed by someone who understands what we actually do all day." Marcus nodded his agreement. "The difference is obvious. This isn't just software that looks good in demonstrations, this is software that will actually make our work easier and more efficient." By the end of the presentation, Desert Peak had committed to a full implementation across all their properties, with a timeline that would make them the flagship case study for Phoenix Property Solutions. More importantly, Marcus offered to serve as a reference for other potential clients and to introduce me to property management professionals in his industry network. The other client presentations that week were equally successful. Jessica Martinez signed on for a comprehensive system implementation at Pinnacle Property Management, and 2 additional companies committed to pilot programs that would demonstrate Phoenix Property Solutions capabilities with different types of rental properties. Within 10 days of receiving Victoria's cease and desist letter, I had enough confirmed contracts to establish Phoenix Property Solutions as a legitimate business with sustainable revenue potential. The legal intimidation that was supposed to shut down my operations had instead generated the kind of market validation that most startups spend months trying to achieve. But Victoria wasn't finished. On Friday evening, I received a call from Lauren, with news that made my stomach drop. "Cassie, you need to see what Victoria just posted," Lauren said without preamble. "She's gone completely nuclear on social media, and she's making some pretty serious accusations about you and Phoenix Property Solutions." I opened Instagram with trembling fingers and found Victoria's latest post, a multi-slide carousel with a caption that was longer than most blog articles. The first slide featured a professional headshot of Victoria looking directly at the camera with an expression of determined sadness, the kind of image that suggested someone who was reluctantly sharing a difficult truth. The caption began with Victoria explaining that she'd been forced to address some painful family situations publicly because lies and misinformation were threatening to damage Rivera Family Solutions and the clients who depended on their services. She positioned herself as someone who had tried to handle family conflicts privately but was now compelled to set the record straight in order to protect her business and professional reputation. What followed was a masterpiece of strategic manipulation that reframed our entire conflict as a story of family betrayal and professional jealousy. According to Victoria's version of events, I had been hired as a technical contractor to help implement her vision for Rivera Family Solutions, but had become increasingly possessive and controlling about work that was always intended to be collaborative. She claimed that I had stolen proprietary business concepts and client relationships when I left the family business, and that Phoenix Property Solutions was essentially a copy of Rivera Family Solutions' original innovation. She provided screenshots of my freelance profiles and client testimonials, presented as evidence that I was passing off stolen intellectual property as my own original work. Most damaging of all, Victoria shared private text messages between us from months earlier, conversations where I'd expressed frustration about family dynamics and questioned whether working together was a good idea. These messages were presented completely out of context, edited to make me sound paranoid and unreasonable, while removing Victoria's responses that had prompted my concerns. The comment section exploded with support for Victoria and criticism of my alleged behavior. Her followers were sharing the post widely, adding their own commentary about toxic family members and people who steal from their own sisters. Several comments specifically mentioned my name and tagged Phoenix Property Solutions, turning Victoria's personal attack into a coordinated campaign to damage my professional reputation. But it was the final slide that really drove the knife home. Victoria had posted a screenshot of what appeared to be an email from a legal authority, confirming that Rivera Family Solutions had legitimate intellectual property claims against Phoenix Property Solutions. The screenshot was carefully cropped to hide identifying information, but it looked official enough to convince casual observers that Victoria's legal claims had been validated by independent authorities. I stared at the post for several minutes, feeling a familiar mixture of rage and helplessness that reminded me of childhood arguments where Victoria would somehow turn every conflict into evidence of my character flaws. She'd taken our private family dispute and transformed it into a public relations campaign designed to destroy my professional credibility and business prospects. The strategic brilliance of Victoria's approach was undeniable. She'd positioned herself as the victim of family betrayal, while painting me as the unstable sister who couldn't handle collaborative work relationships.
She'd provided just enough specific details to seem credible while omitting any context that might complicate her narrative. Most importantly, she'd leveraged her social media following to amplify her message beyond her usual audience of lifestyle content consumers. Within hours, Victoria's post had been shared hundreds of times and commented on by people who had no connection to either of us, but felt qualified to judge family conflicts based on Instagram captions. Property management professionals who might have been potential clients for Phoenix Property Solutions were now seeing my name associated with accusations of theft, manipulation, and unprofessional behavior. I called David Park immediately, despite the late hour, and sent him screenshots of Victoria's post. His response was swift and unambiguous. "This crosses the line from legal posturing into defamation territory," he said, after reviewing the social media campaign. "She's making specific false claims about your professional conduct and sharing doctored evidence to support accusations she knows are baseless. We can definitely pursue legal action for this." David's confidence was reassuring, but I was more concerned about the immediate practical implications than the long-term legal remedies. Victoria's social media attack was already generating negative attention for Phoenix Property Solutions, and potential clients might be scared away by the controversy long before any legal resolution could restore my reputation. "What's our fastest option for responding to this?" I asked. "Honestly, the most effective response might be transparency rather than silence," David said. "Victoria's strategy depends on people only hearing her version of events. If you provide the actual documentation that proves your intellectual property ownership, along with evidence that her legal claims are baseless, it could backfire on her pretty quickly." David was right. Victoria's social media campaign was powerful because it was the only narrative available to people who didn't have access to the technical evidence or legal documentation that proved my ownership of the disputed software. If I could provide that evidence publicly, it would expose the false foundations of her accusations. I spent the rest of the weekend preparing a comprehensive response that would address Victoria's accusations with facts rather than emotional appeals. I compiled the most convincing elements of my intellectual property documentation, created side-by-side comparisons that showed the timeline inconsistencies in Victoria's claims, and gathered testimonials from clients who could speak to my technical expertise and professional conduct. The response I ultimately published was methodical and professional, designed to appeal to people who valued evidence over emotional manipulation. I didn't attack Victoria personally, or engage with her characterizations of family dynamics. Instead, I focused on providing clear, verifiable information that allowed readers to evaluate the intellectual property dispute based on actual facts rather than social media narratives. I included screenshots of my code repositories, showing development timelines that predated Victoria's involvement by months. I shared email threads with early clients that demonstrated my independent development of the software features Victoria was claiming to have created. I provided links to the legal documentation that proved my ownership of all intellectual property related to Phoenix Property Solutions. Most importantly, I included testimonials from Marcus, Jessica, and other clients who could speak to the functional superiority of Phoenix Property Solutions compared to Rivera Family Solutions' failed demonstrations. These testimonials weren't just character references, they were professional evaluations that demonstrated the real-world difference between actual software development and marketing vaporware. The response to my documentation was swift and decisive. Property management professionals who had been following the dispute began sharing my post with detailed commentary about the technical evidence and its implications for Victoria's claims. Several industry influencers picked up the story, framing it as a case study in the importance of technical expertise versus marketing manipulation in software development. Within 48 hours, the narrative had completely reversed. Victoria's social media followers might still believe her version of events, but property management professionals were increasingly recognizing Phoenix Property Solutions as the legitimate innovation and Rivera Family Solutions as the copycat venture built on stolen intellectual property. The shift was most visible in the comment sections of Victoria's posts, where industry professionals began asking pointed questions about her technical qualifications and development timeline claims. When Victoria couldn't provide satisfactory answers to questions about code architecture, database design, or integration protocols, it became obvious to anyone with software development experience that she was claiming credit for work she didn't understand. More damaging to Victoria's credibility, several freelance developers came forward with evidence that Rivera Family Solutions had tried to hire them to recreate existing software based on screenshots, rather than developing original technology. These developers provided email threads and project specifications that directly contradicted Victoria's claims about original innovation and collaborative development. The freelancer revelations were particularly devastating because they proved that Victoria had been lying about the development process from the beginning. She hadn't been collaborating with technical contractors to implement her original vision. She'd been trying to hire people to copy software that someone else had already created. By the end of the week, Victoria's social media campaign had completely backfired. Instead of damaging my reputation and credibility, her public accusations had generated industry-wide scrutiny of her own claims and qualifications. Property management professionals were sharing my documentation as an example of what real software development looked like, while using Victoria's failed demonstrations as cautionary tales about the difference between marketing promises and technical delivery. The vindication felt good, but what mattered more was the practical impact on Phoenix Property Solutions. 3 additional property management companies reached out to discuss potential implementations, specifically mentioning that the intellectual property dispute had helped them understand the technical superiority of my software over Rivera Family Solutions' vaporware. Marcus called to let me know that Desert Peak's implementation was proceeding ahead of schedule, and that he'd already received inquiries from other property management companies who wanted to evaluate similar systems for their own operations. The controversy that was supposed to destroy my business had instead generated exactly the kind of industry attention that most startups spend months trying to achieve. Most satisfying of all, I received a voicemail from my mother on Thursday evening. Her voice was tentative and uncertain, completely different from the confident tone she'd used during our last family confrontation. "Cassie, it's Mom. I've been seeing some things online about your business and Victoria's business, and I think maybe we need to have a conversation about what really happened with that software project. Could you call me back when you get a chance? I think we might have misunderstood some things." I listened to the voicemail 3 times before deleting it. The validation felt good. After months of being portrayed as the difficult family member who couldn't handle collaborative relationships, my parents were finally starting to understand that maybe they'd misjudged the situation. But I wasn't ready for that conversation yet. I was too busy building something real to get distracted by people who were only interested in my perspective now that it had been publicly vindicated. Victoria's attempt to destroy Phoenix Property Solutions had ultimately proved that my software, my expertise, and my professional reputation were strong enough to survive coordinated attacks from people who knew me best and understood my vulnerabilities most intimately. If I could weather that kind of assault and emerge stronger, I could handle anything the business world might throw at me. The legal dispute was officially resolved the following week, when Victoria's lawyer withdrew all intellectual property claims against Phoenix Property Solutions. David Park's documentation had been so comprehensive that pursuing formal litigation would have been professional suicide for anyone involved in Rivera Family Solutions' legal strategy. But by then the resolution was almost anticlimactic. The real victory wasn't legal vindication, it was growing recognition throughout the property management industry that Phoenix Property Solutions represented genuine innovation, while Rivera Family Solutions had been revealed as an elaborate fraud built on stolen intellectual property and false marketing claims. I was finally free to focus on what I'd wanted to do from the beginning, building software that solved real problems for real people without having to worry about family drama, or legal harassment, or social media manipulation campaigns. The battle was over, and I'd won not by fighting Victoria on her terms, but by demonstrating that excellent work ultimately speaks louder than excellent marketing. 6 months after walking out of my family's Scottsdale mansion with nothing but a backpack, I was sitting in the executive conference room of Southwest Property Ventures, reviewing quarterly performance reports that would have seemed impossible just a year earlier. Phoenix Property Solutions had grown from a desperate survival strategy into the region's most sought-after property management technology consultant, with implementations across Arizona, Nevada, and New Mexico. The success felt surreal in the best possible way. Marcus Thompson had become more than a client, he'd become a mentor, and eventually a business partner, when Southwest Property Ventures acquired Phoenix Property Solutions in a deal that made me their youngest regional director. The acquisition wasn't about selling out or cashing in, but about scaling the impact of technology that was genuinely transforming how property management companies operated across the Southwest. My office overlooked downtown Phoenix, with floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the desert mountains in the distance. The view reminded me daily how far I'd traveled from that cramped motel room, where I'd first started coding my way back to financial stability.
The irony wasn't lost on me that I now occupied a corner office in a building I'd once walked past during my desperate job searches, wondering if I'd ever be qualified for the kind of professional opportunities that happened behind those gleaming windows. The morning that changed everything started like any other. I was reviewing implementation reports from 3 new clients when my assistant knocked on my door with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Cassie," she said, holding a manila folder that seemed heavier than its size would suggest, "there's something you need to see." The legal department forwarded this from one of our residential portfolio companies. It's an eviction notice that got escalated because the tenants are requesting executive intervention. I took the folder without thinking much about it. Southwest Property Ventures managed commercial real estate primarily, but we also had residential holdings through subsidiary companies that Marcus had acquired over the years. Tenant disputes occasionally required executive attention when local managers couldn't resolve conflicts through normal channels. But when I opened the folder and saw the address, my breath caught in my throat. Desert Palms Luxury Apartments, 8847 North Scottsdale Road, Unit 402. I knew that address. I'd driven past that complex countless times during my childhood, admiring the palm trees and fountains that made it look like a resort rather than ordinary rental housing. More importantly, I knew who lived there. The eviction notice was standard legal language describing non-payment of rent for 3 consecutive months, violation of lease terms regarding unauthorized business operations, and failure to respond to multiple notices from property management. But it was the tenant names that made my hands shake as I held the document. Victoria Rivera, Helen Rivera, Robert Rivera. My entire family was facing eviction from their luxury apartment, and they had no idea that their landlord's boss was the sister they'd dismissed as too incompetent to handle business responsibilities. I read through the documentation carefully, trying to process the implications of what I was seeing. According to the property manager's notes, the Rivera family had moved into Desert Palms 6 months earlier, just around the time that Rivera Family Solutions was supposed to be launching to great fanfare. They'd signed a premium lease for a 3-bedroom unit with monthly rent of $4,200, plus amenities fees that brought their total housing costs to nearly $5,000 per month. The first rent payment had been made on time, but subsequent payments had been increasingly late before stopping entirely 3 months ago. The property manager had documented multiple attempts to contact the tenants about payment arrangements, but had received only vague promises about temporary cash flow issues and assurances that business funding would resolve the situation soon. More interesting were the notes about lease violations related to unauthorized commercial activities. Apparently, Victoria had been using the apartment as a filming location for social media content, including promotional videos for Rivera Family Solutions that featured the luxury amenities as backdrop for her entrepreneurial lifestyle brand. The lease specifically prohibited commercial photography without prior approval, and several neighbors had complained about disruptions caused by filming equipment and crew members. I set the folder down and stared out my office window, trying to make sense of the timeline. My family had moved into an expensive luxury apartment just as Victoria was preparing to launch her stolen software business, apparently confident that Rivera Family Solutions would generate enough revenue to support their upscale lifestyle. When the business failed spectacularly, they'd been unable to maintain their rent payments but had continued living in the apartment while hoping for some kind of financial miracle. The irony was almost too perfect to believe. The family who'd told me I was too unrealistic about business prospects had committed themselves to monthly expenses that required Victoria's vaporware company to succeed, while the sister they'd dismissed as incompetent was now in a position to determine their housing future. My first instinct was to handle the situation quietly and professionally. I could instruct the property manager to work out a payment plan with my family, or even cover their back rent personally, while allowing them to believe their landlord was just being unexpectedly generous. It would have been the mature response, the kind of gesture that demonstrated personal growth and family loyalty despite our complicated history. But then I remembered Victoria's social media campaign calling me a thief and a liar. I thought about months of being told I was too negative and unrealistic to contribute meaningfully to family business discussions. I recalled my parents nodding along when Victoria accused me of sabotaging projects I'd never been invited to participate in creating. Instead of intervening quietly, I made a different choice. I called the property manager, Elena Vasquez, and scheduled a meeting to discuss the Rivera family situation in person. Elena's office at Desert Palms was decorated with the kind of southwestern elegance that appealed to tenants who wanted luxury living without ostentation.
She was a professional woman in her 40s who'd been managing high-end residential properties for over a decade, long enough to have seen every possible variation of tenant drama and financial crisis. The Rivera situation is particularly frustrating, Elena explained as we reviewed the case file. They present themselves as successful entrepreneurs, but their behavior suggests they have no understanding of basic financial responsibility. The daughter keeps posting social media content showing off the apartment amenities while simultaneously ignoring our communications about past due rent. Elena showed me printouts of Victoria's recent Instagram posts, including several that featured the Desert Palms pool area, fitness center and rooftop terrace, as backdrops for content about living your best entrepreneurial life and investing in environments that inspire success. The posts were tagged with location markers and included captions about how successful people surround themselves with luxury and your environment shapes your mindset. It's like they think that creating content about wealthy lifestyle somehow makes them qualified for wealthy lifestyle expenses. Elena continued. We've tried to work with them on payment arrangements, but every conversation ends with vague promises about business deals that are supposedly about to close. I nodded, recognizing the pattern of optimistic projections that had characterized Victoria's approach to Rivera Family Solutions. She'd always been skilled at generating enthusiasm for future possibilities while avoiding accountability for present realities, a combination that worked well for social media influence but poorly for actual business operations. What are your options for resolving this? I asked, though I already knew the legal framework that governed residential evictions in Arizona. At this point, we're past the negotiation phase, Elena replied. They've had multiple opportunities to address the payment issues or communicate about alternative arrangements. The eviction process gives them 7 days to either pay all outstanding amounts or vacate the unit voluntarily. Elena paused, studying my expression carefully. Can I ask why Southwest Property Ventures is taking such direct interest in this particular case? It's unusual for executive-level management to get involved in individual tenant disputes. I considered how much to reveal about my personal connection to the situation. Elena was a professional who deserved transparency from her management company, but I also needed to maintain appropriate boundaries between personal family drama and business responsibilities. The tenants are family members, I said finally. I want to make sure we handle this situation appropriately, but I also can't allow personal relationships to interfere with standard property management procedures. Elena's eyebrows rose slightly, but her expression remained professionally neutral. She'd probably encountered similar situations before, where family relationships complicated business dealings in unexpected ways. Would you like me to schedule a meeting with the tenants to discuss resolution options? She asked. Sometimes direct communication with decision makers can help clarify everyone's expectations and responsibilities. I thought about that for a moment, imagining the conversation that would unfold when my family realized that their housing crisis had brought them face to face with the sister they'd treated as professionally incompetent. The temptation was enormous, but something about the scenario felt too dramatic, too much like the kind of confrontational family reunion that belonged in soap operas rather than real life. Actually, I said, let's handle this through normal channels first. Send them the standard 7-day notice, and if they don't respond appropriately, we'll proceed with formal eviction procedures. I don't want any special treatment based on personal relationships. Elena nodded approvingly. That's probably the most professional approach. Mixing family dynamics with business decisions usually creates more problems than it solves. I left Desert Palms feeling oddly deflated despite having made what I knew was the right choice. Part of me had been anticipating a dramatic confrontation where I could reveal my success while my family grappled with the consequences of their financial irresponsibility. But the reality was that I didn't actually want to see my family become homeless, even after everything that had happened between us. That evening, I was working late in my office when my phone rang with a number I didn't immediately recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me answer on the final ring before it would have disconnected. Hello, this is Cassie. Cassie? The voice was tentative and unfamiliar, though something about the tone nagged at my memory. This is Victoria. Victoria Rivera. Your sister. The formal introduction was surreal, as if we were strangers rather than people who'd shared a childhood and fought over software ownership just months earlier. Victoria's voice sounded different than I remembered, smaller somehow, without the confident projection that had characterized her social media persona. Hi Victoria,
I said carefully, unsure what tone to adopt for this unexpected conversation. I'm calling because we've gotten into some trouble with our landlord, Victoria continued, the words coming out in a rush as if she'd rehearsed them but was afraid she'd lose courage before finishing. We're behind on rent, and they're threatening eviction, and I know things have been complicated between us, but I was wondering if maybe you could help us figure out what to do. The request was so different from Victoria's usual approach to family communication that I wasn't sure how to respond. No demands, no assumptions about my obligations, no manipulative framing that made her problems somehow my responsibility. Just a straightforward admission that she was in trouble and needed help. What kind of help are you looking for? I asked. I don't know, Victoria admitted. Maybe advice about negotiating with landlords, or recommendations for lawyers who handle tenant rights, or even just someone to talk through our options. I know we haven't been speaking, but you always understood business stuff better than the rest of us. The acknowledgement was so unexpected that I had to sit down. Victoria was actually admitting that I might have business expertise worth consulting, something she'd never done even when we were supposedly collaborating on Rivera Family Solutions. How bad is the financial situation? I asked, though I already knew the answer from Elena's documentation. Pretty bad, Victoria said quietly. Rivera Family Solutions never really got off the ground after you left. I tried to make it work with other developers, but nothing they built actually functioned the way clients needed. We burned through our marketing budget trying to fix problems that kept getting worse instead of better. She paused, and I could hear her taking a shaky breath before continuing. I think I really screwed up, Cassie. I thought I understood the business side well enough to handle everything, but it turns out that the technical stuff was way more important than I realized. Without working software, all the marketing and social media influence in the world doesn't matter. The admission was more honest than anything Victoria had ever said to me about our professional relationship. She was acknowledging not just that Rivera Family Solutions had failed, but that it had failed because she'd underestimated the importance of technical expertise relative to marketing capabilities. What about Mom and Dad? I asked. Are they still supporting the business idea? They're scared, Victoria replied. We moved into this expensive apartment because we thought Rivera Family Solutions was going to be successful, but now we can't afford the rent and we don't have anywhere else to go. They keep asking me what went wrong with the business, and I don't know how to explain that maybe we made some bad decisions about who was essential to the project. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with Victoria describing the financial pressures that had led to their current housing crisis and her growing understanding that she'd made fundamental mistakes in how she'd approached the software business. She didn't explicitly apologize for stealing my intellectual property, or for the social media campaign that had tried to destroy my reputation, but her willingness to acknowledge her business mistakes felt like the beginning of accountability. By the time we hung up, I'd agreed to meet with Victoria the next day to discuss their options for resolving the landlord situation. I didn't mention my connection to Southwest Property Ventures or Desert Palms, partly because I wanted to understand more about their perspective before revealing that information, and partly because I still wasn't sure how I wanted to handle the conflict of interest. The meeting took place at a coffee shop, halfway between downtown Phoenix and Scottsdale, neutral territory that didn't advantage either of us psychologically. Victoria looked different than she had during our last family confrontation, thinner, less polished, wearing clothes that suggested financial stress rather than social media influence. But she also seemed more genuine than I'd seen her in years, as if the failure of Rivera Family Solutions had stripped away some of the performative confidence that had defined her public persona. I've been thinking about what you said yesterday, Victoria began after we'd ordered coffee and found a quiet corner table. About me not understanding how important the technical side was. I think I convinced myself that business success was mostly about marketing and vision, and that the technical implementation was just a matter of hiring the right contractors. She stirred her coffee absently, avoiding eye contact as she continued. But after watching 3 different developers fail to recreate what you'd built, I started realizing that maybe your software wasn't just coding, maybe it was actually innovative in ways I never understood. I nodded, appreciating that Victoria was finally grasping the distinction between software development and software engineering. Many people could write code, but far fewer could design systems that solved complex business problems elegantly and efficiently.
The thing I keep thinking about, Victoria continued, is how you tried to explain the development timeline and feature dependencies, and I kept interrupting because I thought you were being too perfectionist. But maybe you were trying to tell me that rushing to market with unfinished software would create exactly the problems we ended up having. It was the closest thing to an apology I'd ever received from Victoria, and it felt more meaningful than a formal admission of wrongdoing would have. She was demonstrating understanding of her mistakes rather than just acknowledging that mistakes had occurred. What do you want to do about the housing situation? I asked, steering the conversation toward practical problem solving. I don't know, Victoria admitted. We owe almost $15,000 in back rent and fees, and we don't have any realistic way to come up with that money quickly. Rivera Family Solutions is officially dead, and I haven't been able to find other work that pays enough to cover our current expenses. Victoria explained that she'd been trying to return to social media influencing, but her audience had largely moved on during the months she'd focused on Rivera Family Solutions. Rebuilding a following would take time and wouldn't generate immediate income, while their rent obligations continued accumulating daily. Have you considered downsizing to something more affordable? I asked. We've looked at other places, but most landlords want references from previous property managers, and we obviously can't get a positive reference from Desert Palms while we owe them money. It's like we're trapped in a cycle where we can't afford to stay but also can't afford to leave. I sipped my coffee while processing the situation Victoria had described. Her family was facing exactly the kind of financial crisis that property managers dealt with regularly. Tenants who'd overcommitted to housing expenses based on optimistic income projections, then found themselves unable to adjust quickly when their circumstances changed. Victoria, I said carefully, there might be options for negotiating with your landlord that you haven't considered. Property managers would rather work out payment arrangements than go through eviction procedures, especially with tenants who communicate honestly about their circumstances. I spent the next hour explaining the business realities of residential property management, including the costs and complications that landlords faced when dealing with problem tenants. Victoria listened intently, asking informed questions that suggested she was genuinely trying to understand the situation from multiple perspectives rather than just looking for quick solutions to her immediate problems. By the end of our conversation, Victoria had a much clearer picture of her options for resolving the housing crisis, along with a realistic timeline for what each approach would require. More importantly, she seemed to understand that her family's financial problems were the result of specific business decisions rather than mysterious external forces beyond their control. Cassie, Victoria said as we were preparing to leave, I know I haven't been a good sister to you, especially with the business stuff. I don't know if we can fix our relationship, but I want you to know that I'm sorry for making everything so complicated and unfair. It wasn't a complete apology, but it was honest acknowledgement of harm, and it felt like the foundation for eventual reconciliation if we both wanted to pursue that possibility. I drove back to my office thinking about family dynamics, business relationships, and the complicated intersection between personal history and professional success. Victoria's admission that she'd underestimated my contributions to Rivera Family Solutions felt validating, but it also made me realize that I'd moved past needing that validation months earlier. The following week brought news that would have felt like perfect revenge just a few months earlier, but now felt more like inevitable consequences of predictable choices. Elena called to inform me that the Rivera family had vacated Desert Palms voluntarily, leaving behind a brief note explaining that they'd found alternative housing arrangements and would be in contact about resolving their outstanding financial obligations. I never learned exactly how my family had managed their housing transition, though Lauren mentioned in a later conversation that Victoria had moved back in with extended relatives, while my parents had found a modest rental house in a less expensive part of Phoenix. The luxury apartment lifestyle that was supposed to be supported by Rivera Family Solutions' success had ended when the business failed, exactly as basic financial planning would have predicted. More significantly, Victoria had quietly started working as a social media consultant for small businesses, applying her marketing skills to help local entrepreneurs rather than trying to build her own technology company. According to Lauren, she'd specifically focused on clients who needed help with digital promotion, but already had solid business fundamentals, acknowledging that her expertise was in communication and audience building rather than product development or operational strategy. The change suggested that Victoria had learned something important from the failure of Rivera Family Solutions about matching her skills to appropriate business opportunities. She was no longer trying to be the visionary entrepreneur who innovated in fields she didn't understand, but rather the marketing specialist who helped genuine innovators reach broader audiences. I found myself feeling genuinely happy about Victoria's career pivot, not because it represented comeuppance for her previous behavior, but because it seemed like she'd found a professional path that matched her actual strengths rather than her aspirational self-image. Success that built on authentic capabilities was always more sustainable than success that depended on borrowed credibility or stolen intellectual property. 6 months later, I received a text message from Victoria with a photo of a small storefront in Central Phoenix. The image showed a simple sign reading Rivera Marketing Solutions Social Media Consulting for Small Business. The message that accompanied the photo was brief but meaningful. "Thank you for the business advice. It helped me figure out what I was actually good at." I realized as I read Victoria's message that I'd gotten something better than revenge or vindication. I'd gotten the satisfaction of watching someone I cared about, despite our complicated history, find a way to contribute value to the world using skills they actually possessed, rather than capabilities they'd borrowed from someone else. My own business continued growing in directions I'd never anticipated when I first started coding in that Desert Inn motel room. Phoenix Property Solutions had become the foundation for a broader technology consulting practice that worked with property management companies across the western United States. The software that Victoria had tried to steal had evolved into a comprehensive platform that was genuinely transforming how residential property managers operated in competitive markets. More importantly, I'd discovered that building something meaningful and sustainable was infinitely more satisfying than winning conflicts with people who'd underestimated my capabilities. The family who'd once dismissed my business acumen now lived with the daily consequences of their financial choices, while I woke up each morning in a career that challenged me intellectually and rewarded me financially. The view from my office window had become a daily reminder that success wasn't about proving other people wrong, but about building something valuable regardless of whether anyone else recognized its worth initially. Victoria could have stolen my screenshots and copied my interface designs, but she couldn't have replicated the months of research, testing, and refinement that had gone into creating software that actually solved real problems for real people. The best revenge I'd learned wasn't confrontation or exposure. It was simply doing excellent work while other people struggled with the consequences of their own choices. Sometimes the most satisfying victory was the one where your former opponents eventually realized they'd been fighting against their own best interests all along. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.